Welcome back to these series of lectures, American History 2112, second half of U.S. history. I want to take a few minutes to start today and review some of the material we talked about last week. Sometimes teachers forget that they need to go over things and emphasize certain things that are important. Teachers already knowing the material tend to forget that students don't know the material. So I'm going to just touch on some high spots here. We talked about American exceptionalism at some length last week, and I want to emphasize a couple of things. One, this idea of American exceptionalism, this is not an idle sort of abstract notion. This is something I want you to use in this course. You can use it to critique everything you hear about American history, whether the events of American history either confirm or contradict American exceptionalism. The second thing I want to say about American exceptionalism is that the American South is the exception to American exceptionalism. You'll recall that these ideas of American exceptionalism have progress and success at their heart, the notion that there are no impediments that we can't overcome. This does not apply so much to the American South, does it? This part of the country has been defeated in war and occupied as a defeated country, unlike the rest of the United States. The American Civil War, obviously. This part of the country tends to lag behind in education. Traditionally, it has lagged behind in industry and diversity in its economy. These things are changing now in the 20th century, and especially since the Second World War. But the American South is distinct from the rest of the United States in that it has not always had this optimism towards the future. And it has been defeated in war, unlike the rest of the United States, except perhaps for Vietnam, but we'll get into that later. So keep these things in mind as we go forward. I'm going to bring up a couple of things that we talked about last week, and I want to emphasize their historical context and their historical significance. During our discussion of Reconstruction, we discussed the Tenure of Office Act. I want you to be able to place these things in the broader scope of history. So the Tenure of Office Act is a part of Reconstruction. So Reconstruction is its historical context. Why is it significant? The Tenure of Office Act is significant because it led to the impeachment of President Johnson. It's also significant because it represents an intrusion by the legislative branch onto the executive branch. The Tenure of Office Act, of course, was later ruled unconstitutional because it tended to violate the separation of powers, which is built into our Constitution. You'll remember when we talked about republicanism last week, we discussed the fact that the founders created a government where power is spread very thinly. And the Tenure of Office Act tends to give the Senate more power than was intended originally. You'll remember we talked about black codes. Again, context. What's the bigger historical picture of which black codes are a part? Again, Reconstruction is the context. Why are they significant? Black codes are significant because it is an attempt to maintain white supremacy after the end of slavery and after the destruction of the planter class. We talked about the New South, and we talked about Henry Grady and his funeral speech. So remember the broad scope of history. Where does Grady fit? The New South. That's the context. As far as significance, Grady, his attempt to do a couple of things here. One, point out that the South has all the natural resources that one could want. Two, that these resources and a docile labor group or labor class here in the South should be very attractive to northern businesses, for businessmen to bring their industries to the South. So place Grady in context, the New South, and understand that he's trying to diversify a colonial economy, an economy that's dependent upon one commodity crop, in this case cotton. You'll recall last week also we discussed Plessy versus Ferguson. Let's place this in historical context. I would accept the New South as context. I would accept Jim Crow, legalized segregation as a historical context. Why is it significant? Well, it mandates or legalizes discrimination, which will stand for another half century until Brown versus Board of Education. And then the last term I want to review is Lincoln's 10% plan. If you're going to place Lincoln's 10% plan in context, where does it fit? I would accept either the American Civil War, because it was during the war that Lincoln put forward this plan. It is a Reconstruction plan of how to bring the South back into the Union quickly and as easily as possible. So I would accept Reconstruction as well as a context for the 10% plan. Why is it significant? Well, it illustrates President Lincoln's sincere wish to put the bloodletting of the Civil War behind us, to bring the South back into the Union, and to resume normal relations with the recently seceded states. So that's a quick review, again, trying to attune your ears to context and significance so that when you hear these terms, you'll take note of them. Like I said earlier, this is how these lectures are organized around these terms, and these are the type of questions that you'll get on your exams. Thank you.